Hi, good day everyone. My name is Doriel Umbual and welcome to our video presentation which is about corporate social responsibility and corruption in global context. So, as you can remember from the previous group, corporate social responsibility or known as CSR is a self-regulating business model that helps a company be socially accountable itself, its stakeholders, and also the public. By practicing corporate social responsibility, companies can be conscious of the kind of impact they are having on all aspects of society, including economic, social, and environmental. So to engage in CSR means that in the ordinary course of business, the company is operating in ways that enhances society and the environment instead of contributing negatively to them. So corporate social responsibility has gained currency. It is because companies are adopting ethical policies or codes of conduct stating how they intend to behave. Corporate social responsibility also means different things to different people. One is that CSR is not about philanthropy or charitable work. It also refers to something much fundamental. So corporate social responsibility is a broad concept that can take many forms depending on the company and the industry. Through CSR programs, philanthropy, and volunteer efforts, businesses can benefit society while boosting their brands. So it is about how companies take responsibility for their actions in the world at large. So, corporate social responsibility is a business model by which companies make a concerted effort to operate in ways that enhance rather than degrade society and the environment. Conventional CSR watchdogs include labor unions, consumer groups, environmentalists, NGOs, and all stakeholders watching over their interest as opposed to stockholders only. To address the social problems or the problems of the stakeholders, the business community evolved a new approach in their business strategies named CSR. Through CSR, enterprises are intent to strike a balance between economic and social goals, which resources are used in a rational manner and social needs are be addressed responsibly. So for a company to be socially responsible, it first needs to be accountable to itself and its shareholders. Companies that adopt CSR programs have often grown their business to the point where they can give back to society. After all, the more visible and successful a corporation is, the more responsibility it has to set standards of ethical behavior for its peers, competition, and industry. So, Lotus Holdings defines CSR as the integration of the interest of the stakeholders, all those affected by a company's conduct, into the company's business policies and actions, with a focus on the social, environmental, and financial success of a company. The so-called triple bottom line, with the goal being to positively impact society while achieving business success. So one important aspect of CSR is that it is not a legal obligation, but rather a voluntary social and environmental positive initiative to establish an image of environmentally and socially responsible businesses that also encompasses micro, small, and medium enterprises, or known as MSME, as well as giant corporations. So one of the best examples of this is Starbucks. You know what Starbucks is, right? So Starbucks has long been known for its keen sense of corporate social responsibility and commitment to sustainability and community welfare. According to the company, which is according to my research, Starbucks has achieved many of its CSR milestones since it opened its doors. So their 2020 report mentioned how Starbucks planned to help the world navigate the coronavirus pandemic. So the company's response to the pandemic, sorry about that. So the company's response to the pandemic focuses on three essential elements. First is prioritizing the health of its customers and employees. And the second one is supporting health and government officials in their attempts to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. And number three, showing up for communities through responsible and positive actions. So today, there are many socially responsible companies whose brands are known for their CSR programs. So CSR is typically a strategy that's implemented by large corporations, but also small and mid-sized businesses also create social responsibility programs, although their initiatives are rarely as well publicized as those of larger corporations. So that would be all. Thank you.
Corporate social responsibility in a global context. CSR and developing countries. The concept of corporate social responsibility, or CSR, aims to examine the role of business in society and to maximize the positive societal outcomes of business activity globally. Business activity that has so far been labeled CSR has been driven by the concerns of investors, companies, campaign groups, and consumers based in the world's richest countries. The strategic challenge for government at national and local levels is how to shape an agenda that has been largely market-driven and responsive to concerns for rich country stakeholders. The CSR movements and initiatives have emerged in different countries, such as China, India, South Africa, including here in the Philippines, and Brazil, among others. However, in developed countries, there is an increasing recognition that a one-size-fits-all approach to CSR in operations around the world is ineffective. The result has been a reinvigorated focus on themes of greater importance in middle and low-income countries, including the value of sustainable local enterprise and the role of business in poverty reduction. Justification for CSR. There are two broad sets of justification for public sector actors in middle and low-income countries to engage with CSR: the defensive justification and proactive justification. The two are not mutually exclusive. Thus, a policy initiative that initially has a defensive justification may quickly be a part of a proactive strategy of engagement. Defensive justification. It relates to minimizing the potential adverse effect of CSR on local communities and environment and markets imposed through international supply chains and investment. The experience of business-to-business standard is that costs and benefits tend not to be equitably distributed along value chains, with costs of private standards borne by producers, whereas benefits accrue to the retailer. These issues are partly rooted in bargaining power disparities between producers and buyers. Similarly, the burden is on the producer to comply. But further problems arise for supplier firms that have to comply with multiple, even conflicting, codes of different buyers. Proactive justification. Public sector's actors to engage with CSR is provided by the opportunity to increase the domestic public benefits of CSR practices in economic, social, and environmental terms. In countries whose export sectors are closely associated with consumers' social, health, or environmental concerns in agriculture and textiles, there may be a positive opportunities for governments to facilitate market access gains for their producers. A number of analysts and governments are also beginning to explore the hypothesis that promotion of CSR in the domestic economy can bring benefits for competitiveness as a whole. The extent to which this happens is likely to depend on the sector and the country-specific features. More broadly, there is also scope for public sector actors in middle-low income countries to harness enthusiasms for CSR to help deliver public policy goals and priorities.
From the standpoint of sustainable development, public sector engagement with CSR has the potential to cover a wide range of social, economic, and environmental issues, including corruption, poverty alleviation, and human rights violations. The objectives of public sector participation in CSR are likely to differ from one country to the next. They could be organized in accordance with the fundamental motivations for public participation in CSR initiatives. The alignment of business activities with public policy in order to achieve societal goals is the first widely defined goal of public involvement in CSR. A clear government vision of how it intends to address issues where there are potential trade-offs between economic, social, and environmental considerations, such as the use of the country's natural resource endowment for socio-economic development, may increase the likelihood of corporate contributions to national development being successful. CSR practice has 5 distinct roles for public sector engagement with CSR, and these are regulation, facilitation, partnership, endorsement, and demonstration. In this practice, there are no bright lines between them. Many of the policy instruments governments wanting to promote a CSR agenda and could be considered as expressions of more than one of these government rules. The variety of policy instruments employed by governments to advance goals linked to CSR is extensive and reflects a wide range of policy approaches as well as changing economic circumstances. Some governments may choose interventionist approach over a non-interventionist approach. Others may desire to act against the grain of market forces such as consumer interest or civil society pressure. Capacity constraints is the size of domestic markets for products potentially affected by CSR concerns. The degree of export orientation of the economy sectors affected by international CSR drivers such as agriculture, textiles, pharmaceuticals is the presence of enterprises willing to champion change and the degree to which different stakeholders are comfortable working in part together are all factors that may influence the course of action taken by any individual government. In the widest meaning of corporate social responsibility, every country's complete collection of social and environmental regulations can be viewed as a manifestation of the public sector's commitment to CSR. Additional statutory provisions such as competition policy, fundamental investment and enterprise frameworks, and rights to transparency and public participation in decision-making all contribute to the enabling environment for CSR.
Corporate social responsibility in international business. Let's first define what international business and CSR, or corporate social responsibility, is. So, an international business, by definition, is a company that transacts on the global stage, while corporate social responsibility is self-regulation by a global company with the objective of embracing responsibility for the company's actions and creating a positive impact through its activities on its customers, employees, communities, and the environment. Multinational enterprises' activities are faced with diverse legal system in each country, coupled with new public opinion, more demands on social responsibility, sustainability, and transparency. This term is generally understood to mean that corporations and businesses, more generally, have some responsibility not only for the economic consequences of their activities, but also for the social and environmental implications. Ranges of application for CSR in the international perspective. So the first one is the sustainable development and environment. Today's generation must invest for the future and stop borrowing from the future generation by wasting the resources at present. However, the future generations would be able to follow CSR more easily as there would be standardization of processes and practices. And so, there's a need to promote new economic development model based on the context corporations should go beyond the minimum. This will bring turn to better consumer favor, product and process innovations, and raw material savings. Human and labor rights. Corporations, especially the larger ones, have a huge impact on the economy as well as the social and political life of the countries in which they operate. From the standpoint of socially responsible behavior, corporations are supposed to adhere to the principles of justice and fundamental rights. So the first one is be compliant. Operational conduct of the enterprise should not be lower than the standards. Next is be consistent. Have partners of the same kind in adopting the same observance and recognition of rights. So the enterprises must protect the primary rights of its workers wherever it operates and strive to observe the following. Refrain absolutely from making recourse to forced or obligatory labor and intimidation of any form. Be an advocate for the abolition of child labor, meaning ensuring that every children have the opportunity to develop physically and mentally to their full potential. Its aim is to stop all work by children that jeopardizes their development. Respect the right of privacy and freedom of opinion. Workers have a right to peaceful enjoyment without being disturbed or harassed by others, and they have the right to say what they think, share information, and demand a better work in the company. Respect the exercise of the political rights and of the trade union activities. The ability to participate in the civil and political life of the society and state without the fear of discrimination or repression, and is tied closely to citizenship status.
refrain from discriminatory treatment by reason of sex, race, religion, political opinion, citizenship, or social extraction. Provision for a fair compensation. The salary structure of workers should be just, fair, and equitable. Provision for a healthy and safe working environment because safety of workers is important. With the RA 11058, employers are now required to comply with occupational safety and health standards, including informing workers on all types of hazards in the workplace and having the right to refuse unsafe work, as well as providing facilities and personal protective equipment for the workers. Local economy and society. Large international enterprises bring extraordinary impact on the development of less developed countries. However, problems occur in the differences on technological capability of the host countries, lack of capacity to adapt. Involvement of stakeholders is necessary in terms of relevant decisions that would contribute to the development of the territory or to the host country in particular, and that it reduces investment risk. So there are typical examples of conduct of multinational companies that considered to be responsible and have gained wide positive recognitions. So these are the transfer of technology, the grant of licenses for the use of intellectual property rights at cost compatible with the local market, granting authority to manufacture products and brands that are protected, training for the development of local skills, development of new products by means of local knowledge and skills, creation of viably durable forms of collaboration with local partners, corporate venturing investment in the local startup capital. Multinational companies' sincerity to develop the host company is to invest on the fixed assets if allowed by the host. These assets, like buildings, means one thing: they will be here for long, if not for good. CSR in action, giving out a portion of their income for projects like maintenance of roads, improvements of public hospitals, adoption of a school, and other activities that should have been rendered by the government. This would give a good feedback from the community and create good reputation for the company.
Transparency. Corporate transparency is a form of deep-rooted managerial initiative which evolved into a philosophy of removing walls and facilitating free and easy public access to corporate information. It involves openness, communications, and accountability. So when we talk about transparency, it includes financial disclosure statements, the freedom of information legislations. It could be a review of budgets, audits, and religious compliance on reportorial requirements of the authorities. Basically, business transparency is the process of being open, being honest, and being straightforward about various company operations. Transparent companies share information relating to performance, also the revenue, the internal processes, and even business values. Next to transparency is the legality. It is the adherence to the applicable set of laws in force is the minimum requirement. The prerequisite of corporate social responsibility is to go beyond the law provisions in order to contribute to the establishment of a fair and sustainable development. A socially responsible enterprise rejects conducts and practices such as unfair competitions, corruptions, and tax evasions that put at risk the growth and development of the societies, not just the societies but also the corporate or the company. Basically, businesses that opt for a corporate social responsibility strategy declare to the public, and not just to the public but also to their stakeholders, that they do not engage in any illegal financial market and insider trading, as well as in tax evasion through the practice of transfer pricing facilitated by their transnational structure. The next is the consumers. Consumers' organization point out the importance of a reliable information and the conditions of production and sale of the products, including in any indications on the potential risk arising from their use and consumptions. So basically, all enterprises knew that their reputations and therefore their success really depend on their commitments towards sa ilang customers or sa consumers in general. But those that have chosen a social responsible behavior, dili na nila ginatanaw ang ilang mga consumer or customers as a client, but also ila silang gina-consider as collaborator in pursuing their CSR strategy. And also kanang the consumers' demands not only concern into health and eco-sustainability of the goods and of the productive phases nga ilang gaka-received, but also they consider it as the evidence that they are not produced by means of exploitations of human resources. The next is the supply chain. Supply chains have become extremely complicated as a result of market globalizations, and they are frequently outsourced to countries with inadequate human rights protections, no environmental standards, or a high tolerance for unfair treatments due to a lack of alternatives. When we talk about supply chains with regards to corporate social responsibility, it is when companies that make up a supply chain work together to share, to understand, to work, and to fix environmental and social problems within the supply chain. However, on the other hand, companies that can guarantee the observance of ethical behaviors across the whole production cycle by binding all of their chain partners to their own ethical code, it may have many positive effects in terms of the first one is the improvements in market reputation through specific certifications or qualifier labels. The second one, confidence of the ethical investors and of the consumers or the customers. And the last one is the good relations with institutions and social organizations.
Closing the loopholes. More sweeping attempts to recover stolen money will require announcing an international convention and at the same time closing loopholes that can lead to leaving the country. Closing offshore centers is very important in prevention of corruption. These offshore centers is somehow connected to banking activities and other services that includes fund management, insurance, trust business, tax planning, and IBC activity. They are also the one who give financial services to non-residents. As what I have said, closing offshore centers rather can help prevent corruption of money. But the process is not just that easy, and it really requires a step-by-step process to provide time in building up the other local countries. Other small Caribbean countries like Antigua, St. Martin, St. Kitts, Virgin Gorda, etc., and other islands has set up offshore centers for the reason that their purpose is to gain more tourists, or in short, to diversify tourism and agriculture. blacklisting companies. In 1998, the World Bank set up a sanction committees to investigate cases of corruption by the companies. So the purpose of sanction committees, they are the one who investigates and who look for the companies that are guilty for corrupting the money. They also have a list of the barred firms called the World Bank listing of ineligible firms. So the companies are really exposed in this list. And as shown by the list, there were 54 companies and 34 of them is British companies. The UK government should take actions against these companies sanctioned by the World Bank, and they should also ensure that there are no Western or UFCD company sanctioned by an international financial institution such as the World Bank. The UK government should also ensure that there are binding anti-corruption clauses or corporate compliance programs in contracts at the national and international level. Any successful anti-corruption program has to be built up at national level, be appropriate to local and national context, and have full support from government employees at all levels. In addition, as the 1919 Commonwealth Report on Corruption argues, action programs need to be designed to meet the expectations of citizens, who need to be informed about the national strategy to combat corruption. Effective action to fight corruption is most likely through programs which are nationally owned, designed to meet national circumstances, and built on the foundation of popular empowerment.
Hiding the loot, Western banks and third-world assets, private banking services, and offshore financial centers are the major conduits and repositories for bribes and corruption gains. An estimated $40 billion from poor and former communist economies finds its way into US or European banks every year. Much of it is illegitimately gained. Some $30 billion of Western aid used as part of the Cold War game of winning friends has ended up in Swiss bank accounts. Leaders from some African countries have collectively had up to $20 billion on deposit in Switzerland's banks. Haiti's baby duck Duvalier is known to have kept $300 to $900 million offshore banks, while Philippine President Marcos salted away well over $2 billion in Western banks. Private banking, increasingly used for confidential services to international elites, is believed to be worth as much as $17 trillion worldwide and is experiencing phenomenal growth. Globally, private banking is predicted to grow 2 to 3 times as fast as ordinary consumer banking in the next few years. So, in a 1999 U.S. Senate inquiry revealed that 350 of Citibank's 40,000 clients were senior foreign government officials or their relatives, including President Omar Bongo of Gabon, who transferred $100 million through personal accounts in Citibank's New York branches. Asif Ali Zardari, the husband of former Pakistan Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, who transferred some $40 million to the Citibank accounts. 3 sons of Nigeria's General Sani Abacha, who had held some $110 million in Citibank accounts, including some in the name of shell corporations set up by Citibank. Raul Salinas, the brother of former Mexican President Carlos Salinas, who transferred $80 to $100 million in alleged drug money out of Mexico between 1992 and 1994 through Citibank's account. Offshore banks and companies, another part of system through which money is transferred illegally out of poor countries and hidden well away from citizens. Offshore centers have become excellent places to launder the proceeds of crime and corruption. So we have here that it is said that when dirty money disappears offshore, it becomes more difficult for governments to tackle corruption because of the secrecy with which they operate. Offshore centers have become excellent places to launder. Yes, as what I mentioned earlier. Next is recovering stolen wealth. International pressure has been mounting in recent years to return money which has been stolen and stashed away. In 1998, we have here some cases. In 1998, $500 million of former Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos was returned from Swiss banks to the Philippine government. The Presidential Commission on Good Government set up after Marcos was deposed has recovered overall some $1 billion of the $5 billion that the Marcos family squirreled away. In March 1999, the freezing of all accounts of former Nigerian ruler Sani Abacha's family. In October 1999, Swiss government called on 5 banks to freeze several accounts held in the name of Abacha's son, Mohammed. In January 2000, £390 million in accounts belonging to Abacha and his associates recovered $700 million and believe Abacha stashed $1.5 billion in embezzlement funds. In November 1999 also, the Bank of England froze the London bank accounts of Angola's rebel leader Jonas Savimbi. That would be all.
So one of the effects of exporting corruptions is deterrence. Economic punishments are some of the most effective deterrents to corruption. Opening development projects to more public security can be another effective deterrent. The system includes massive devolution of funds to local meetings, which are required to draw up plans for deploying them, and a concerted effort to maximize public attendance at such meetings. The 8K democratic principles are central, which includes maximum direct participation of the people, accountability, transparency through the right to information. The potential for corruption, a problem before the new system, is minimized by a commitment to transparency and openness of all documents and decisions. As the Hindu newspaper notes, total transparency is the only way to check the danger of decentralization degenerating into decentralization of corruption. All documents on beneficiary selection, reports, and minutes of meeting, and all documents and works undertaken by the local bodies through contractors and beneficiary commitment, including bills and vouchers, are public documents. Copies are available on payment of a fee. Next is the resistance. Fighting corruption is increasingly engaging the energies of civil society groups around the world. To be effective, they must mobilize ordinary people. Civil society groups will need to be protected to take on governments in innovative and sometimes confrontational ways. Also, to push for freedom of information. It enables ordinary people to use information, and only if they have the relevant knowledge can citizens hold their government accountable and ensure that resources that belong to them are used in the right way. And lastly is, it should help to increase citizen participation in decision making. Greater participation by groups that represent the poor is a must in decision making every level, local, regional, and national. Greater citizen participation is also required in monitoring and auditing public expenditure. Civil society groups needs to play a critical auditing function if they are to hold the state accountable to their poorer citizens. Cracking down on bribery will not necessarily make international business more accountable, nor will it end corruption overnight.